murder. She was the first woman under the federal government to actually be killed. She was one of John Wilkes Booth's conspirators, and the thing we don't know is, was she guilty or was she not? As we all know, Lee surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, which ended the Civil War. It was unconditional surrender. So this meant that the South had lost everything. They had lost their government, they had lost their land, they had lost all the rights and stuff that the Southern Constitution had given them. You know, Booth had promised that to his mother that he wouldn't fight, that he would stay kind of neutral, but Booth really hated the North. He was open about his Southern sympathizer. He supported slavery, and he did not believe that Lincoln could overthrow the Constitution of the South. There were several different kidnapping strategies that historians have learned about, and this was actually one of them. Lincoln was going to be kidnapped at Ford's Theater. Now, Booth had planned it to where he was going to kidnap Lincoln. He wasn't going to kill him. Well, everything that he started to do, it started to unravel. He had people in charge of different things. They backed out on him. So Booth finally he'd give up his acting career, and he started buying supplies for his plot. And you know, money back then was a whole lot to everybody. Well, he spent everything he had. I mean, he was pretty well at the end of this with penniless. The second attempt was Lincoln was actually going to travel to a hospital. And when Lincoln traveled to a hospital to see some injured soldiers, on the way, Booth and his band was going to kidnap the president, hold him captive, and ransom him off. But the carriage came. Lincoln was not in the carriage. Booth was mad, and then that's whenever the third plot was, well, I'm just going to get rid of him and be done with it. So kidnapping gone wrong. On the 20th, 65, this is when he had planned on kidnapping him from the soldier's home. You know, he just nothing he ever planned really worked out too well. But like I said, Booth was mad, so therefore the decision was to kill him, and this was going to be a month later. So President Lincoln's last speech, it was April 11th. He had heard that the war was over with, so he went outside to give a speech. Everybody was waiting for him. And as you can actually see from the picture, you have Lincoln, which is in the middle of the second stage. Booth was actually there watching him from the top of the stage, and his conspirators was underneath. Now, Lincoln outlined his idea for Reconstruction from the defeated Confederacy and was talking about the slaves and how they were going to be able to vote and all this stuff. Booth lost it. From the books and articles I've read, Booth almost shot Lincoln there, but he knew he would never be able to get away. Lincoln assassination. Booth was supposed to assassinate Lincoln, which he did. The plot was also to get Grant, was supposed to be a guest of Lincoln. Grant actually left out because he wanted to spend time with his family. So they left. On the way out of town, a man that looked like Booth from Grant's wife's account rode up, looked inside, and rode off. George Atzerodt was supposed to kill Vice President Johnson in the Kirkwood House. Lewis Powell and David Harold was there to guide Powell through Washington and kill Secretary Stewart. These are the co-conspirators, John Wilkes Booth, we all know him. He was actually a famous uh, theatrical player. He wasn't as famous as what his brother was. I think that always sometimes eat at him, but he was very much a Southern sympathizer. Lewis Powell, Lewis Payne, or Lewis Payne, however you want to say it, he was actually a POW in the Confederacy. He was a very strong and skillful man. David Harold, he wasn't that bright, but he was with Booth throughout the whole way from the back of the theater to whenever he actually surrendered before Booth was shot. George Atherot, he was a painter, a carrier. He was actually supposed to kill Johnson. He lost his nerve at the hotel bar. What had happened was he actually went to the bar and started drinking and got dog-faced drunk. And seeing Johnson and everything inside, he got scared and left. Now, Samuel Mudd, the poor guy, all he was a doctor. The more books I read, the more I realize he was actually probably in this plot more thicker than what some people realize. He set John Wilkes Booth's leg. He let him stay overnight. He fed him. He housed him. There's a story that John Wilkes Booth actually came to do some scouting with him and was sent to Mudd by some of his co-conspirators. And Mudd, helped him get a horse, showed him the lay of the land. But anyway, President Johnson actually released him in 1869, and pardoned him. But the expression "drug through mud," this is where has come from. His family never was anything. His kids and everything else pretty much had to change their last name. Because they never amounted to anything after this. Spangler was actually he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was just a stagehand. He knew John Wilkes Booth. He'd done anything at the stage for John Wilkes Booth. John Wilkes Booth came that night. He called for Spangler. Spangler held his horse and got found guilty in a conspiracy. Samuel Arnold, he was actually a Confederate sympathizer. He was involved in the kidnapping plot. He never agreed to the murder. Therefore, he left and did not have any contacts with John Wilkes. And we get to the lady of the hour, Mary Surratt. Mary Surratt was a simple lady. She had one child, John Surratt Jr., and she had a daughter as well. Her husband wasn't very good to her. He actually died, and they had to move into town. They used to own a boarding house / saloon out in the country. And when she moved to the house, she had to rent out rooms to be able to make it because she didn't have anything. And this is where they found all the conspirators. The house was only, I think, 4 blocks from the Forest Theater. So that's where John Surratt Jr. was actually part of the conspiracy for kidnapping and a conspiracy for the murder. John Jr. actually fled before anything happened to Canada, and she was pretty well pulled in and murdered for her son's part of the plot because she never would give him up. And this is a picture of John Surratt. After everything happened, he stayed. He knew his mother had died or had been killed. He stayed so long that whenever he did come back, he was arrested, and they tried him in a court of his peers, which was different than the military court that they tried the rest of them. But in the court of his peers, the jury was split because you had half was Southern sympathizers and half was Northern sympathizers, and they actually let him go. Now, the picture on the left, this is her house as of today. They have turned it into a museum. There's different places and different things there as it was then. Of course, we also know that the house that Lincoln was taken to the night of his assassination, the bottom of it has been turned into a theater or to a historical monument as well. The picture on the right is what the Sherrod farm slash bar slash whatever you want to call it back in the day that they had. Now, the boarding house was used for the kidnapping plot and the murder. Uh, Booth was a family friend. He was well known. He played in theater. He was a leading guy. So, kind of see where they would like him to stay there. It kind of brought some you know praise to their place. Now, Mr. Floyd, he lived and he testified against Mary Sherrod about how she brought him guns and field glasses. Well, the true story is that she brought him stuff. John Sherrod actually hid the guns earlier. Mary brought a package for Booth from Booth that was wrapped up, and she never even looked inside. She didn't even know what it was. So Mary Easter Wright, she was tried by the military department. This was one of the very first trials. We talking about tyranny and authoritarianism and all that stuff in this class, and this is why I wanted to kind of talk about this because this woman was really tried with no witnesses. She couldn't even talk for herself. None of them could. She had a lawyer that was give to her. He didn't even want to trial because he was part of the Union Army. He believed she was guilty. When he started doing some digging around, everything that he tried to do for the trial, the military generals that was overseeing the trial pretty well swept it under the rug. He had to testify that to him, this is what happened, this is what was said, this is what was going on, and then whenever they get to court, they would change their time. Well, the trial started, and a lot of the generals was worried that, she was a woman. People changed their testimony. I know at least 2 or 3 of the witnesses changed their testimony from what they told one of the generals when they was questioned, from the time that they talked to her defense to the time they actually did the trial. Testimony had been all the men each had been in a boarding house many times. They had been, but they went into a room and shut the door, and Mary or her daughter really never knew what was going on in that room. Mr. Lloyd said that she had brought the guns and whiskey for Booth the day before the deal was done. That was a lie. She brought a package to him, didn't know what the package was, and Mr. Lynchman, he was actually part of the conspiracy. He was also a ex-turncoat. He, was trying to get into the Confederate Army. They wouldn't let him in there. He was given the Union Army secrets. He knew all about this, and surprisingly, he wasn't there the day of, but he didn't get found any kind of problems. They wouldn't let Mary take to stand or even talk, and they wouldn't listen to her. Now, the state's evidence was the shooting glasses, the shooting irons, the field glasses, the men stayed in the boarding house. Mr. Lloyd's testimony, which he was a proven drunk, and couldn't remember really from one day to the next what was going on. And, she had bad eyesight, and one of the things was she lied about knowing Powell. Well, Powell come in there the night of, talking about wanting her to dig a ditch, and he come to see about that, and when she couldn't see, she didn't notice him because he had changed clothes. He didn't look the same way he did when he left, but was there before, and he used an alias when he was there. They said she was guilty because she lied. The case fought by Mr. Aiken. This was one of his first and only cases, and I feel bad for him as well. Lloyd lied when he told the truth. Her daughter told him about Mr. Lynchman, and that's right. Mr. Aiken found out that the Welshman was tied to the Confederacy spy ring. She had poor eyesight, and nothing that he said the chairperson would listen to, and he was actually almost found in contempt and got pretty rowdy with him. It was a military trial, not a civil trial, which this is the first time that I've ever read anything about a military trial, just 100% military. There was no judges. The generals ran everything. Johnson told the military generals that he wanted someone to suffer, that the country had lost, and he wanted some revenge, and that was pretty much what it was. It wasn't anything about putting the truth, it was putting the death to show the federal power and that we are one union. That was actually a quote from Vice President Johnson at the time. And the trial was actually against the law that was set up by the Constitution. We're supposed to have trial by jury. Well, there was no jury. The jury was the generals that was given orders by the president at the given point in time. The one good thing I think to come out of this was 5 out of the 9 didn't want her hangers. They wanted to put her in there for life, which if they had put her in there for life, she would actually have another trial. They would have been able to do anything. But the letter somehow didn't get to President Johnson. I've read 6 books on this, and I've read 3 or 4 different articles and essays papers by historians, and they all say that somehow it just disappeared. Which, we know how that goes. But a fun fact about Bruce Diary, when it did resurface, there was 43 pages that was missing. The FBI did try to use this to impeach Johnson, which we all know he wasn't actually successful in getting impeached. So, the whole part of this of religion was they didn't want to hear anything about it, which if you study religion at all, you'll understand that pretty much their priest cannot say anything. So Mary had told the priest where John was hiding. He couldn't tell nobody. So that's why after Mary. There are some videos that I found that was kind of cool to watch. This first one here, I believe, is actually part of the trial. And here are my references. And this is the